Now, an inclusive green economy is one that improves human well-being and builds social equity while reducing environmental risks. That's according to UN Environment. It's something that African nations are investing in more heavily. Well, CGTN's Kiyo explains from Beijing.
Well, as we know, Africa is the continent worst affected by climate change, yet it produces the least carbon emissions. Now, that does not mean pollution does not exist on the continent. Now, several projects across Africa are working toward a green economy, many in partnership with China. So it will likely be encouraging to many on the continent to note that China remains committed to reducing climate change and to build green economies. So what does Africa need in terms of that? Well, first, it's funding. That's according to the UN Environment. The organization also says generating knowledge and awareness on green economy is key. Authorities and ordinary Africans need to know about the social and environmental benefits of the approach. Government and stakeholders across the continent need to refocus policies and investment into green economies. And that's been happening in several parts of the continent, but it will also take time. Africa's international partners will have to play a critical role in the years to come. And those who have signed the Paris Climate Accord, with some notable exceptions, are committed to going green. Kiyo, CGTN, Beijing, China.
Well, let's delve further into the topic with Simon Gear in Johannesburg. He, of course, is an environmental scientist. You're very welcome to the show, sir. Now, we have seen countries like Ghana, Morocco, Kenya, South Africa as well. They're now integrating climate change issues into their national development plans. Ethiopia has developed a climate resilient green economy strategy. So what exactly are your views on progress in terms of Africa's investments in the green economy?
I think the green economy represents an enormous opportunity for a lot of African countries, not necessarily to keep their carbon footprint down, because with the exception of South Africa really, most of these countries have a fairly low base as far as their carbon footprint. But when you put a green technology in, it means you're leaving fossil fuels in the ground, for example, or you are separating yourself from reliance of having to import fuel into your country. And so it just makes your country's energy system way more resilient and just generally more environmentally friendly for that immediate area, not necessarily the globe, although it obviously has global impacts as well.
Now, of course, this is the discussion currently taking place in China. So what role do you think that China has played in the building of Africa's green economy?
Well, China is the world leader in production of things like solar panels and a lot of the big solar, the wind farms as well. And so from a South African perspective, for example, we're seeing massive imports of the actual structures that need to be used to build these sort of big solar and wind farms. So that's very, very valuable. And it's a huge opportunity for China as well. And then there's this expertise that China has from the 1980s and 90s, when China really started driving up their development. A lot of Africa now is in a similar sort of place to where China was back in those days. And so there's an expertise that China can provide, particularly to parts of East Africa, where we can start getting villages more energy independent and access to the latest energy technology. And I think all of that is a place where China really can play a very, very valuable role.
Now, the UN actually says Africa's biggest need when it comes to climate change is funding. It also points to knowledge and awareness in the sector. What do you think Africa specifically needs?
Look, funding is always a big deal. And so no project's going to go anywhere without funding. But I think knowledge transfer is vital as well. And I think sometimes there's a temptation when technologies or projects are funded from outside of Africa to send in a sort of senior management, senior technical team, and all of the job opportunities that are created are at a very sort of low blue-collar level. And I really do hope that as we see this rollout of green technology in Africa, that there's a significant knowledge transfer and a breeding up of African expertise to run and to design these projects further.
Well, what are the policies you think we need to see that will guide this process in terms of the green economy in Africa?
I think it's very, very important that we don't allow this to operate outside of our normal environmental impact policies. There is sometimes a tendency to think, well, because it's a green technology, we can maybe just railroad it through. And that's not the case. Things like wind farms and solar and hydro schemes, they all have their own local environmental impacts as well. And so it's not enough just to think because we're putting a carbon-friendly technology in that we ignore the local environmental impacts. And so I think that is probably going to be the most important step, is that we really do our environmental due diligence very, very carefully as well, to make sure that these things do have the benefits that they should have.
Well, many thanks for your insights and many thanks for joining us on the show. Of course, that was Simon Gear in Johannesburg. He is an environmental scientist.